In this clip, we are going to cover how reconnaissance works. The basic concept is that each HQ unit has a reconnaissance point allowance, which is the value in the upper right corner of the unit, in this case 1 RP. Each reconnaissance point allows one attempt to be made against a target hex. If the attempt succeeds, then all enemy units and markers in the hex are revealed, with the sole exception of any minefield marker, which remains a mystery if it is yet to be revealed. The player makes reconnaissance attempts during the reconnaissance segment of each friendly activation cycle. He makes a reconnaissance attempt by expending an RP from a headquarters unit in the active formation. He can also expend any off-map RPs that the scenario might allocate to him, and in the case of NATO, any division headquarters superior to the active brigade can also channel its RPs through that brigade's HQ if the brigade HQ is within the division headquarters command range. We will cover that shortly. In this example, the 27th Guards Motor Rifle Division has established multiple bridgeheads across the Main River, here and here. The NATO player has just activated the 36th Panzer Brigade with the intention of launching a counterattack. During the reconnaissance segment, he declares his first reconnaissance attempt against this hex here. He declares that the 36th Panzer Brigade headquarters, here, will expend its 1 RP to make the attempt. He then refers to his NATO tracks card, finds the RP marker for the 36th, and moves it down from the 1 box to the 0 box. Next, he declares a spotting unit, which must be a maneuver unit in the active formation that is subordinate to and within the command range of the specific active headquarters that is expending or channeling the reconnaissance point. The requirement that the spotter be a maneuver unit means that an engineer, headquarter, or artillery unit cannot serve as a spotter. In this case, the NATO player declares that this unit here will be the spotter, and this unit is subordinate to the headquarters that will expend its reconnaissance point, and it is also within command range of that headquarters, which has a command range of 10. Next, he determines the 2 pieces of data required to make the attempt, which are the range from the spotter to the target hex, and the type of terrain in the target hex. In this case, the range is 3 hexes, 1, 2, 3, and the target hex is in light woods. Referring to the reconnaissance table, the NATO player finds that at the intersection of the row for light woods and the column for 2 to 3 hexes, the reconnaissance value is a 4. This means that the NATO player must roll a 4 or better. He rolls the die and gets a 6. This means that the target hex is acquired. The NATO player places an acquired marker on the unit. The NATO player may now examine all the units in this hex, and all the markers in the hex with the sole exception of any minefield marker. Next, the NATO player decides to expend one of the 2 reconnaissance points from the 12th Panzer Division main HQ to make a reconnaissance attempt against this BM-21 multiple rocket launcher here. In order to record the expenditure of these points, he goes to the NATO HQ tracks card, locates the RP marker for the 12th Panzer Division main HQ, and moves it down 1 box. He determines that the active brigade here is within the command range of the expending division HQ, which means that it can channel that reconnaissance point, and that the spotter that he wishes to use here is within the command range of the active brigade HQ. So this channeling attempt works. He then determines the 2 critical pieces of data for the reconnaissance attempt itself, which is the range to the target, in this case 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the type of terrain in the target hex, which in this case is heavy woods. Next, he refers to the reconnaissance table and he sees that at the intersection of the column for 4 to 5 hex range and the row for heavy woods, the reconnaissance value is a 7. So he's going to have to roll a 7 or higher. He rolls the die and gets a 5. That means that the reconnaissance attempt fails. Note that once a player has made a reconnaissance attempt against a hex and failed to acquire it, he cannot make another reconnaissance attempt against that hex in the same activation cycle. In some future activation cycle, he could certainly use another reconnaissance point to make a reconnaissance attempt against that same hex, but he cannot do so twice in the same activation cycle. The NATO player then decides that he wants to use the off-map reconnaissance point allocated to him by the scenario to make a third reconnaissance attempt against the DAG for the 27th Motor Rifle Division. Off-map reconnaissance points can use any subordinate maneuver unit in the active formation as a spotter, with no requirement that they be within the command range of a superior headquarters, nor is an off-map reconnaissance point in any way channeled through an active headquarters. It acts directly from off-map. To record the expenditure of this reconnaissance point, we go to the NATO tracks card and move the off-map reconnaissance point marker down one box. The NATO player declares that he will use this active maneuver unit here as the spotter. The range is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and the terrain is heavy woods. Referring to the reconnaissance table, we see that at a range of 6 through 10 hexes, trying to see a target in heavy woods, the reconnaissance value is a 9. The NATO player rolls the die. He gets a 9. That means that he has acquired this hex. The NATO player declares that he has no more reconnaissance attempts to make, and that ends the reconnaissance segment. During the ensuing strike segment, the NATO player will be able to execute a strike against each of the hexes under an acquired marker, and also against this unit here, which is adjacent to a friendly unit in the active formation. The 2 acquired markers that we see here on the map will be removed during the intelligence fade segment at the end of the current NATO activation cycle for the 36th Panzer Brigade. If the NATO player wishes to strike either of these hexes a second time, he will have to acquire them again during the activation cycle for a different NATO formation. And that ends this tutorial on reconnaissance. There is one thing, a rare event, that I forgot to mention. There are times where a player may want to make a reconnaissance attempt against an empty hex for the purpose of making an artillery-delivered mine strike or a gas strike into that hex, because those are strikes that leave a lasting impression on the map and could ultimately end up creating obstacles to the enemy at some future point in time. So let's just say, for the sake of argument, that the NATO player wanted to make a artillery-delivered mine strike on this hex so that these 2 units would be unable to cross the river without running into the mine, and this unit would be unable to escape around this line of NATO units without running into the mine. In that case, we refer to the reconnaissance table, and what we see is that the bottom of this table has a line for empty hex or military bridge. So if the NATO player wants to see an empty hex, or potentially to spot a military bridge so that it can ultimately destroy it, something that will be covered in another segment, he would roll on this table. So in this case, the hex that we wish to acquire is on the 2 through 3 hex range, and therefore the NATO player would expend a reconnaissance point, use a spotter, and then roll the die, and unless he rolled a 1, he would successfully acquire the hex. Meaning unless he rolls a 1, he will successfully acquire this hex and would then be able to drop an artillery-delivered mine field on top of it. All right, that covers that little edge case.